Super Mario Bros. 2 might not necessarily be the fan favorite or most fondly remembered game of the original Mario Nintendo Entertainment System platformer trilogy, but it's still a pretty fun and worthwhile game to play despite how brazenly strange it is. It's still very beloved, don't get me wrong, but its more slippery nature and cryptic puzzle levels don't have it sitting as high in terms of nostalgia the same way the original Super Mario Bros. Or Mario 3 do. But hey, it's the first appearance of Shy Guy and a few other franchise staples, so I am a fan. I love Ninja. Ninja is awesome, so yeah, let's just get that out of the way. Before this point, I had never actually played through Super Mario Bros. 2 to completion, and now I've done it 3 times, so I feel like I get it. Like, I think I understand the game. There's the original on NES from 1988, based on the Japanese 1987 game Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which was, by the way, kind of based on the Super Mario 2D platforming engine, just more focused on vertical design rather than just horizontal left to right movement. I played this via the Switch Online NES Games emulator, where most people who want to play the game legally would play it as of time of recording, though it is around in original cartridge form on various online used storefronts for reasonable prices if that's the route you want to go. And by the way, I'm obviously not talking about the 1986 Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, which is better known in the West as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. I will eventually play through that game, but I gotta work my way up to that one. There's a reason Nintendo thought us Westerners couldn't handle it until Super Mario All-Stars came out. I don't know if I'm... It looks rough. Speaking of which, the next way to play Super Mario Bros. 2 is via Super Mario All-Stars, where it got effectively remade for the 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1993. This one is, of course, playable on the Nintendo Switch Online SNES emulator. You might also find the original cartridge goes a little more expensive than the original Super Mario Bros. 2 cartridge on websites like eBay, but, you know, still it's nothing crazy. All-Stars also got re-released for Wii, so that option could work for you if you're looking for a used physical edition of the game and don't have an SNES laying around. Finally, we have Super Mario Advance on Game Boy Advance from 2001, which in my opinion remains the most robust and modernized official version of the game. But it's not necessarily my personal pick for the best. This one is most readily available through the Switch Online GBA emulator software, though it's locked behind the expansion pack paywall, so keep that in mind. Finding used versions of the GBA cartridge though is by far the easiest and cheapest, so if you want to play it on original hardware, this would be your best bet in my opinion. And truth be told, to me, this is the technically best version, though it has its caveats. Going back to the NES version, I do have to admit it still has a unique charm and overall feel to it that I enjoy. But I do have to say that the repetitive music and oftentimes boring one-tone backgrounds drag this version down a bit in my eyes. I'm sure many NES purists will say this is the best version, and that's fine. After all, things don't change all that much gameplay-wise between the 3 versions, but I find something lacking in the aesthetics of the original. I do like the overall color palette, but I don't know. Though what was really novel at the time was that you didn't just have to play with only the Mario Brothers. You had a character select screen every time you start a level. This time you could play as Blue Toad and Princess Toadstool. Nowadays, a choice like this would be screeched about online by insecure people calling it woke. Maybe a few decades earlier they'd call it political correctness. But back in the late 80s, it was a simple and fun addition. No one really cared about things as much back then, I think. Well, I don't know, maybe they did. I'm just saying this wasn't that crazy a choice. Not only this was the first time that Mario and Luigi had in-game sprites with differing heights, not to mention gameplay differences. Each character has different abilities, like Peach's ability to float for a little bit, Luigi's loose physics but higher flutter jump, Blue Toad's speed, and Mario's, Mario-ness. Yeah, I don't know. He's Mario. Look at him go. This makes choosing which character to play as in each level way more interesting, and can influence which secrets you're able to find. You'll notice I am mostly stuck with Peach, primarily because her floating ability makes the platforming much more bearable. A lot of these choices were influenced from how the developers translated the characters from Doko Doki Panic into the Mario universe. Also, turnips. Characters can pull turnips and many other things right from the ground to be used as projectiles. This includes enemy sprites, who almost all can be used as platforms themselves, picked up and thrown. Also, rocket ships, evil flying theater masks, Birdo, and so much more. Super Mario Bros. 2 feels bizarre because it simply is. I mean, it is a dream after all. Moving on to the SNES version, not much is actually all that different. There may be micro nuances in the gameplay physics, but I wasn't able to notice anything super jarring. What I was able to notice is how much more beautiful this game is. It's a massive upgrade in aesthetics, and while that unique color palette may be gone, the energy remains the same. I will say, the random inclusion of what looks like Lego bricks everywhere is welcome, but I have no idea why this was the move visually. It's cool, but okay, Lego, yeah, sure, whatever. Some people might not like the new SNES sound font, but I found it much easier to listen to on repeat versus the NES version. The arrangements here have much more depth and feel less sharp. The sound effects also sound nicer here, at least in my opinion. And arguably, most importantly, it's no longer Blue Toad. It's just a standard issue red spotted Toad, which is pretty interesting because they would later bring back Blue Toad in the squad they assemble for Super Mario 3D World on Wii U and Switch, which has essentially the same 4-player characters from this game with nearly identical gameplay abilities too. Overall, I'd say this version, like Super Mario Bros. 3, is my personal favorite. It's got awesome visuals that flesh things out, but some changes do, one could argue, suck away some of the personality of the original just a tiny bit. Still, this is just the one I prefer the most to play. Just my opinion. Making Peach a blonde makes sense, but it would be a while till we saw the return of Blue Toad. Luckily, he'd return in New Super Mario Bros. Wii in 2009, but without his signature speed. Now, let's move on to the Game Boy Advance version, Super Mario Advance, which has way more going on with it, like this newer opening cinematic. Of course, you're immediately also gonna notice the voice acting. A lot of people that I've seen talk about this game really dislike this, and I understand why. It's the Game Boy Advance, so the sounds already suck. Now add some repetitive voice lines for characters and it becomes horrifically annoying. And it makes things kind of confusing, as Birdo used to be canonically male, but now appears to be female and has a female sounding voice.
This is far as you go!
Just because an organism is pink and has a bow means it's gotta be female? How do you know that a bow in the Birdo species isn't a sign of strong masculinity? Is Birdo canonically trans? I just have so many questions that they unnecessarily added by making this one bizarre change. Now me, personally, I actually don't mind the voice acting all that much, but I can totally understand why it's a turnoff for many. There are these supersized, or maybe let's call them advanced sized enemies, still all able to be picked up and yeeted. There's these extra large turnips too to pluck from the ground, and every time a character tries to pick one up of these supersized items or enemies, it takes a little while longer for the animation to happen, emphasizing the extra effort needed. In general, all the animations are more developed, with crouch jumps adding in this flip animation that the originals definitely lacked. There's now new platforms and other changes they've made to levels, meaning, effectively, this is kinda not the exact same game as the original anymore. Some of these changes are for the better, making the game easier for potentially younger players who might be bothered by the higher difficulty of the original, emphasized further by the greater amounts of hearts available throughout as well, now available through multi-hit combos on enemies. Some changes are weird, like, oh boy, Roberto, a robotic version of Birdo, which is actually a pretty annoying boss fight. Why replace Mouser here? It's such a strange choice. There's also these advanced coins that you can collect 5 of per level, and the Yoshi challenge too. While it can certainly be argued that the Game Boy Advance version is the best way to play the game, one factor of the screen scaling still remains. This was an issue I had in playing all the Super Mario Advance games on the big screen, being that the older games were made to be played on a TV, whereas these games were made to be played on a smaller screen of a Game Boy Advance. This means all the scaling is kinda off, and it leads to some interesting cropping issues that you might not have with All-Stars or the NES original. However, that being said, I do have to admit that while I preferred the 4:3 aspect ratio entertainment system versions, I do recognize that the best version, especially for new players, is the Game Boy Advance version. It has more replayability, more robust design and animations, and just overall feels a little more refined when it comes to the physics, screen preferences and voice acting aside. But what do you think? Which is your favorite version? Maybe there's some cool ROM hack version that you played that makes everything better. I don't know. Sound off in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Keep on jumping, plucking, and dreaming, Mario fans. Mario 2 remains Game of the Year.
Super Mario Brothers 2.
I'm so sorry. I tried to do the whole video without even doing like the donkey reference. I couldn't help myself. I'm so sorry. Please just forgive me this one time. I promise that I won't do it again. It's just so tempting, you know. I want YouTube this whole time.